Hey, what's happening? It's Scott. This is Motivated by Mountains, and today I want to talk to you about my favorite shelter of all time, and that is the Zpacks Duplex. All right, guys, so today I'm going to go into all the details of my duplex. There are a million reviews, obviously, on YouTube covering this shelter, also covering all of the specs. So I'm not going to dive super deep into the specs as far as floor dimension and height of things and stuff like that. I'm not going to dive into that. What I'm going to show you is the things that I've experienced, the good, the bad, the ugly, over the last couple of years, and how I've dealt with those things. I still think this is a fantastic shelter, but there's definitely a few things that you need to be aware of before you purchase this shelter. Okay, so one of the biggest problems that people complain about with the duplex is the fact that you have to lean out to attach this little clip to this D-ring here to this little hook. And I'm going to show you that right now. I'm going to show you how it works and what you need to do to add this to your duplex, or really any other shelter that has a similar setup with these doors. Anything that stakes out, I mean, even something with a zipper, if it has two doors that meet, it's going to work perfectly fine for you. And I think it's pretty rad. So what it is a loop of cord, super lightweight, and two carabiners and one piece of shock cord. You attach it to the door. When you pull the loop, door goes down, nice and tight. When you pull the other side, it goes up, just like that. And then you can tie it up here. Now I did also add a magnet to the side here. That way it's very easy to just put the door up. I don't know if you've ever used these toggles when your fingers are super, super cold, but it can be a little bit of a pain, especially in the dark. So the magnet makes that a whole lot easier. Plus, when you pull the door, it just comes loose. You pull it down tight. You don't even have to fiddle with it with your hand. It's just super, super easy. And I've found that this works really, really well. Now, I'm sure that the first thing people are going to think is it still leaves a gap here. And wind is going to come in, it's going to catch the door, it's going to be crazy. Well, obviously, if it's windy or very windy, you can still attach it to the hook just like you normally would, and that's what I would recommend. So when I put this back down, you can see, I mean, it's overlapping to this point here, which is a good ways out from the bathtub floor. I would say at least a foot. So, not a problem. I'm going to show you all the hardware and everything for that right now. So, there's a carabiner hooked right up here on just a piece of shock cord. I leave the shock cord on my trekking pole all the time. It's not in the way ever, even if I'm using them to hike. I just slip it down to here. If I'm just storing the trekking poles in my pack, I'll leave this on as well. But obviously if I'm using the hike, I take that off. So carabiner, and then this is a continuous loop, goes down to another carabiner at the bottom, and that is just hooked into my the loop at my stake. And then the cord, you can see that moving there, the cord just runs right through the carabiner and it creates this loop. Now as I pull the loop, it's tied right here to another hair tie. You could switch this out for a piece of shock cord if you feel like that's going to hold up better. It's been on here 2 years, still going strong, and it gives it that little bit of stretch, so it's not putting so much tension and stress on your door. So as you slide this up or down, that goes up and down, which makes the door go up and down. Most people are going to find with the duplex, obviously, is that it's a single wall shelter, and people are always freaking out about condensation. Well, if you're worried about condensation and you're considering a single wall shelter, the first thing you need to do to deal with condensation is realize that there's going to be condensation. Doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter where you camp, at certain times you're just going to have condensation. It's just physics. That's just the way it works. But there are plenty of easy ways to deal with it. All right, so to deal with condensation in your tent, the first thing you're going to want to have is one of these guys. This is just a cheap piece of chamois. This one is probably 8 inches by 8 inches. I find that it's plenty big enough to deal with what I need to deal with in my shelter. I also use this outside of my shelter. Definitely great for cleaning up anything that's wet, soaks up water super quick and wrings right out. It's amazing how much it absorbs, and then it also dries really, really fast. So all you're going to want to do is when you do have condensation on your tent, you're going to take the chamois and just wipe it and just work your way all the way down, and it's going to soak up all that water, and then you bring it up outside, problem solved. Now another thing that you can do is you can take your rain jacket and slide it over the end of your foot box. That's also going to help with dealing with any condensation inside of your tent. That way, if your foot box does touch the tent, you know, your quilt doesn't get wet, or your sleeping bag. It'll also bump up your a few degrees of warmth, which is really cool too. The next issue that we're going to move on to is the bathtub floor itself. This, I think, is probably the biggest issue that the duplex has. I know myself, I've had at least 3 or 4, maybe more nights where I've been on a little bit of a slope in the duplex, and throughout the night I slide down and end up pushing out on the bathtub floor. And what happens is that the bathtub floor pushes out beyond the tarp edge, and then the rain actually rolls off of the tarp and comes right into the bathtub floor. I have had a significant amount of water in the bathtub floor, and once again I use the chamois to mop it up and bring it outside of the tent. And I mean, even with I probably had a good inch of water in the lower corner of the bathtub floor, and I was able to clean it up with the chamois within like 5 minutes. When I lay down, and I have plenty of room in the shelter, don't think that my feet are pressed up at the end. I'm 6 feet, 6'1", and I have plenty of room, but right now I'm scooting down intentionally to push on the bottom so you can see what I'm talking about. So when I pushes that edge down and out, and even though there is a cord, and they've got, a way for you to hook it on the inside here. And what that does is it pulls it in and up, right? So that kind of helps with that, but it really only pulls it back a few inches, and it's not hard. And, this is shot cord. It's not hard at all to push this out beyond the edge of that tarp. That edge gets shoved out just slightly beyond the edge of the tarp where the rain can roll into there, and you're going to get wet inside of the bathtub floor. Now, jump back in here. There's a couple of things you can do to deal with this. Number one, you obviously want to try and find a spot to camp that is not on a slope, but that's not always going to happen. Sometimes it's just you can't find that ideal spot, or you might be night hiking. I've had that happen a few times. Dark, you're trying to choose a spot with a headlamp, and you just don't realize that you're on a bit of a slope, and so throughout the night you start to slide. So a couple of things you can do to deal with that. You can put shoe goo is a great adhesive, multi-purpose too, because you can fix your shoes with it, but also you can put little dabs of shoe goo on the bottom of your sleeping pad and the top, and what that does is it creates traction so that it won't slide as much on the bottom of your shelter. Okay, so that's worked really well for me. Another thing that you can do if you're sliding on your, it's not necessarily your pad that's sliding on the floor, but you're actually sliding down on your pad. Something you can do is if you have an extra piece of clothing, you can roll that up, slide it underneath of your underneath your sleeping bag, in between your sleeping bag or your quilt and the pad itself, just below your hips. And as your body is wanting to slide down that pad, it's going to hit this bump. I know it sounds silly, but it actually works. It's going to hit that bump, and it's going to keep you from actually sliding further down on your pad. It's like putting a little speed bump on top of your pad. So that's another thing you can try. Now, one other thing I've done is the cord here. If I think I'm on a slope and I think there's going to be an issue, I can pop this out, and then I have, this is for drying clothes and hanging up my light, whatever up top. I just got a piece of lightweight cord. And then this guy here is another piece of shock cord with a loop. Super stretchy. So you can take this guy and actually attach it to that guy. So what you end up is this guy here through the loop that goes down there all the way up. And now, instead of just pulling straight up to this guy, it's actually pulling up and out toward the center of the shelter, and that's going to pull this further away from the tarp edge. So really easy thing to do. You just need like 10 inches of shock cord. What else do you need to know about this shelter? Another thing that I see, and this pertains to a lot of different shelters where there's an issue with head and foot room. So you're going to see tons of people that just take this line and they stake it straight to the ground. And you can see how it pulls it out a little bit, but not much. So here's the setup that you want. Goes out and up slightly, down. All you need is a very small stick. You actually don't want a fat stick. You don't want something that's heavy, because if it is heavy, it's going to want to do more of this number. It's going to want to fall over to the sides. Really increase the amount of head and or foot room. You do this on both ends. I do it every time I set up the tent. Now there are 2 tie outs. This is the one you want to use. I've never used this one. I suppose if you were tying out to a tree above, that would work. Maybe that would work better. I don't know. I've tied out to trees, and I just always use the blower one. It works great. This is the head end. Obviously, I'm not laying on a pad right now, but my head would be up like this on a pad, even a 2.5 inch pad. And you can see how far away this is from my face. It's a long way. I mean, it's not even, it's a good foot from my face. When I sit up, I don't hit my head. It's all good. I've got plenty of room at my feet. No issues. My duplex, the way I set it up with 8 tent stakes and a stake bag, Dyneema stake bag, and the stuff sack, everything weighs just under 23 ounces, which for some may seem kind of heavy, but for me, I think that is perfectly acceptable. Super stoked on it. Okay, so those are the issues that I've had with the duplex. Overall, super stoked with the shelter. I would highly recommend it. It is the easiest shelter to set up. Super easy, super quick, take up and down. Easy to put away. The stuff sack's nice and big, fits right in there really easily. Obviously, it's made of Dyneema, so it doesn't absorb water. So it's, it doesn't get heavier when it gets wet. Sil nylon shelters, when they get wet, they stay wet and they get really heavy. Dyneema does not do that, which is amazing. And if it's wet and you end up packing up camp in the rain, you catch some sun whenever that does happen, you hang it up for 5 minutes in a little bit of a breeze and it's dry, just like that, which is super awesome. The space in this tent, I've slept in here with my brother. We're both pretty big. I'm 6'1", he's 6'4", and no problem. I've slept in here with my kids, my wife. Definitely big enough for 2 people. And so that brings me to another point. I think as far as the price point of this shelter, I mean, obviously it's an expensive shelter, and I know that's one of the things that keeps people away from it. But the fact that it is capable of sleeping 2 people makes it a much better bargain, I think, because spending $500 or $600 on a shelter for 1 person, that's a really big commitment. But when you can use it for 2 people, that changes the game completely. All right, guys, that's it. If you like that information, hit the like button down below, and of course, subscribe to the channel for more. I'm Scott. This is Motivated by Mountains. See you on the next one. How'd you clean up the water in the tent?
With a chamois.
The ShamWow.
ShamWow.
Wait, you have to say that in an Australian accent.
Crikey, use the ShamWow.